Cool. Hello, everyone. Woo Can't Cook. This camera is crooked. This is Woo Can't Cook. Today we're doing a string bean chicken recipe, which is really inspired by the version that you can find at Panda Express. If you're following on the YouTube channel, we did a recipe for it last Friday, and we're cooking through it today. And in that recipe, I very loosely followed along with what the Panda Express version is. And then kind of got really distracted and did a lot of different things that are not in the Panda Express version. And I think it turned out a lot better than the Panda Express version, because I think that their version is toned down quite a bit in order to make it like more affordable for like healthy eating. I think it's designed to be like a healthy option, which is gross. And why would you do that in a stir fry? That sounds terrible. So we're gonna do a version that is mostly one that I wrote. So we're gonna take a look at a couple of the things that we're going to be using in order to make it a little bit more tasty and a little bit more umami forward, as opposed to I think the original Panda Express version just uses ginger and soy sauce, which I think is but also like that's kind of what's in all stir fries. So anyway, we're going to be diving into all of that today. So if you have any questions in the chat, I don't know everything about string bean chicken, but I know lots of stuff. So hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least fun to watch. And as always, we are cooking along to a recipe that has already come out over on the YouTube channel. So if you are not on the YouTube channel yet, definitely hop over and check out what's going on over there. We got fun recipes coming out every Friday. So last Friday was the recipe for the string bean chicken, and this Friday coming up is for larb gai, which is a Thai leg wrap, which is going to be really fun. I'm surprised that I actually knew that. So as with most of our stir fries, pretty much every stir fry, I'm starting off by crushing and mincing. This is 4 cloves of garlic, and then next we're going to do about an inch or about a tablespoon's worth of ginger. So the other thing that I also wanted to mention, this particular stir fry, it stays pretty close to most of the things that you will generally come across when doing stir fries. So that's probably one of my favorite parts about the stir fry, is that because it just generally walks through a lot of the very, very common things that you will see happen in stir fries, which is we're working with aromatics. There's a meat element. There's a very, very dense veggie element, which is our string bean. There's also a very, very delicate veggie element, which is going to be a little bit of white onion. So we're going to talk about all of that today. So next up, though, this is my ginger, which I'm going to, as you may have noticed, my ginger is very old. You might have noticed there was also a bit that had already started sprouting, which is generally a sign that it's probably time to throw your ginger out. I think this ginger is going on 2 months old, maybe a little bit more than that. That's kind of too old, but maybe that's too old for ginger. But it's generally not a problem unless it starts molding. This is what I have. Ginger has started to mold, and some of my ginger actually has started to mold. If it starts molding, probably throw it out, but otherwise it's generally fine. What I do recommend that if you are working with particularly old ginger like we are today, is that you probably want to make sure and peel off that extra skin, so that first layer of the ginger. It is totally edible, so you can absolutely eat it if you are opposed to eating, if you are opposed to peeling ginger. But if you don't mind it, I definitely recommend peeling that bit off because it's a little bit chewier and not the most pleasant eating experience. And it's also not that much work as long as you do it with the back of the spoon. So next what I'm going to do is I just did is running our knife through this for our fine mince, like so. There we go. So that is what we will do in most of our recipes as the aromatics of our stir fries, specifically because, as you would expect, we're looking for the aromatic elements. So we're going to add these to our wok fry very, very early and bloom out their aromatic qualities very, very first. Dirk Diggler, what a good username. Am I a professional chef? I don't really know what it means to be a professional chef. People pay me to cook, though, I guess. I don't consider myself a chef. People do pay me to cook stuff, so Yes, actually, so I guess short answer is yes, we started a pop-up booth. And I operate a food pop-up that's also called Woo Can Cook. And you can find us every first Sunday at the Alameda Antique, second and fourth Saturdays at Hayward Farm. All in due time. So if you're looking for more information about all that stuff, that's at woocancook.com/, which is lots of fun stuff living over on that home base. And that's our pop-up shop. There you go. I always forget to link stuff. Yeah. Cool. Next up, this is our veg. We are working with, it's going to be half of a sweet white onion. This is a very large white onion. So when we do what we're going to do is a dice on our onion, which is going to have, when we dice our onions, we want to make sure that we leave this root end on. This is very, very important. Because when you go to dice your onion, what's going to happen is that root is going to hold the onion together. It's very, very useful because if you dice and apart, it's not a good time because it makes it very, very difficult to get an even dice. So as we leave that onion root on, and then we just chop around it, and then you'll notice that everything sort of just holds in place because we left that root end on, and then we can just sort of toss that root. And that is our onion. What we're going to do is we're going to throw this into our wok fry very, very late. So this is going to be the last thing that gets into our wok fry. And the reason that we're going to do that is because onions are very, very delicate. They are mostly made up of water. So if you throw an onion into a wok fry too early, or even timed out with the other vegetables like what we're going to do next, that's going to cause a lot of problems because it's eventually just going to just straight up will literally just disappear into your stir fry because they're made up of water. So eventually those onions are just going to keep giving up their water, and if you give up enough water, they will literally just disintegrate and then you don't have anything in your wok fry. You might have something that smells like an onion, but that's about it though. So in order to make sure that those onions stay nice and crispy, we're going to throw those into our wok fry extremely late. So it's going to be the last thing that goes in, and it will only actually be in the wok for maybe, I don't know, like a minute or maybe 2 minutes. No more than that. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So next up, this is our string beans. If you're wondering, I have done quite a bit of research on what is the difference between a string bean and a green bean, and also what's the difference between a long bean, which turns out is a completely different thing. The difference is origins of the word itself. But the origins of the string bean is that it used to have a longer piece. So this is the vestige of this string bean. It kind of looks like this. This stuff is not that tough. You do come across a green bean which I have on occasion done. You're gonna want to pick that part off because it's really, really annoying to chew on. It's tasty. So generally you want to make sure to pick that off, but almost always when you come across these in markets, you should not be finding any strings attached to your string beans anymore. They're generally grown without that stuff on it. When you pick up string beans in the markets, make sure that they have those string beans. It's going to add a lot more trouble to your prep time. The other thing that we want with, it reminds me of broccoli. Reminds me a lot of broccoli in that broccoli veggie, which means that if you throw broccoli into a stir fry with other very, very delicate veggies like onion, for example, like we are doing today, it will probably not cook in the same as that broccoli or as that onion. So string beans, same technical problem that we're going to run into, which is essentially these string beans. They're very, very dense, and they're going to have a lot. They're going to take quite a bit to cook. So we're going to mind when we do is that they're going to take a lot longer than those onions. So we're going to throw string beans in. We're actually going to cook these string beans in these string beans. It's a very, very quick sear for about 2.5 minutes. Sort of like how we're going to do, or how you would do here on like steak, and similar. And you're gonna end up. Then what we're gonna do is pull that out of our wok fry and then toss it in at the very, very end. Some of these string beans not looking so hot, which I'm not super excited about. You started cooking during the pandemic and have a nice set of tentacles. Oh, nice. Oh, you're looking at Japanese knife. That's going to cost you some money. Yeah. Is there a level of experience that you should have before buying a nice knife? I don't think so. I think it comes more down to cost. What I'll say is this. So the knife that I'm using, it's a pretty expensive knife. It's a pretty expensive French chef's knife. But before I had this, I don't have it anymore. But it like had a plastic handle. Buy them in Costco. For a long thing, I had that knife for like 15 years before I upgraded to another knife. What's more your knife is to make sure that the knife is nice and sharp. It's going to be like a lot more detrimental to your chopping than having a cheap knife is having a nice knife that's really, really sharp. Even a really, really nice knife that's really, really dull is going to be problematic. I have the same problem with these knives all the time. On occasion, you will see cheaper. I think it's actually a Westhoff. I think it's a Westhoff 8-inch. Actually, didn't check. Switch off to and that's because the knife that I'm using right now is dull. So that's going to be a lot more important. Once you get like really, really comfortable and like find yourself really, really familiar with your knife, then I feel like it might be time to upgrade. But if you're already in that space, then I don't see why you shouldn't be investing in it. The main differences that I find in between. So here's my the knife that I use all the time, and then my cheaper. So these are the other two knives that I use all the time. So this is it's very, very and this is just a knife, which is like a knife that you get. I one on hand. Occasionally, I don't like chopping stuff with a carbon steel because it gets really annoying, especially when I'm doing like prep cooking in the kitchen. For like at really, really large volumes, because the carbon steel is really annoying because you have to keep keeping your knife down. So I have this knife that I keep and very, very sharp, and it's very useful to have on hand. And then I just have this knife on hand too. Cook with me in my kitchen home here. This is the knife that I usually lend out to people because lots of people like fuck up my nice knives. I don't want them to do that. All three of these knives, I use them all the time. They're all like really great knives. They're really, really sharp. That's really, really important part is that I have gone through and made sure that all of these knives are extremely sharp before doing anything else. So by far more important is that it's like really, really nice and sharp. But if we take a look though, we could look a little bit more closely. So like the weight of each of these knives is very, very different. This knife is actually pretty nice. But like a little better. Stick, so it kind of feels a little like doesn't feel quite as comfortable in my hands when I'm chopping. Part of that is also because it's got a shorter blade to it. So it does have an 8-inch blade. This is a 12-inch blade that I have, which is the nicest knife that I've owned. Is that it's got a little bit more weight to it. So this, it's just got this nice bevel to it right here, which is a little bit more comfortable. And it's just generally like a little bit like more like in a groove that I like to work with. So like those are like the real differences, just like those really, really minute changes that go in between the knives. But otherwise though, by far the more important thing is to make sure that it's sharp. So what I always say is if you are going to invest in if you are trying to invest in some like, is that before you do that, make sure that you invest in some stuff to make sure that your knives are nice and sharp. So, ooh, can I show some sharpening? Yeah, I probably can't show some sharpening because my whetstone is not prepped for that. So, but I can show you what I use though. So this is a whetstone. Whetstone is literally basically a giant rock. But I kind of liken it to paper is, so it's like a really fine. So this particular whetstone, it's really useful. It has two different grits to it. So the first side, this is the 1000 side, and this side is the 6000 side. So 1000 grit being a little bit less, like a little bit more coarse, and is nice for like shaping and like shaping the edge of your knife. Not shaping, but like sharpening your knife, like really doing that fine sharpening. And then the 6000 side is for like getting it like really. And the last thing that I'll use is a strop, which is basically just a giant piece of leather. And this is the thing that you'll see a lot of like barbers use. I believe this is actually a barber strop, and lots of times you'll see them clip it to their belt. And it's literally just a piece of leather that you run your knife on. And I always say those are probably the three most important things that you want to invest in. A good whetstone. So I think this whetstone was maybe like $100, something like that. And by far, this is a lot more important than having a nice knife. And essentially, what you want to do. So I don't know a lot about knife sharpening, so I don't think I can dive all the way into this. But essentially, I believe you should be going for a 33 and like 33 and change. I think it's like 31 degrees. Look at it. So what you usually can do is you say, so this would be 90 degrees, in half is 45, and you want to go a little bit lower than 45, which I think is up to like something like 30, 38, something like that. And then we grind our knife on it, so going in this fashion direction. I'm not going to do it because the whetstone has to be wet first, obviously. So I haven't soaked this whetstone, so I actually can't sharpen my knife right now. But yeah, by far more important to make sure that you have a really good solid whetstone. Yeah, thank you for the good tangent. But yeah, otherwise though, if you have all that stuff though, I definitely recommend get into some nice Japanese knives. Those have been like really hot lately. Lots of people have been getting into Japanese knives, which kind of makes them a little bit like overpriced in my experience. I always thought that Japanese knives, they always run a little more expensive than they actually should be, just because they're like trendy right now. That's cool though. Especially if you could get your hands on a good deal. Alright, so here's our string beans that I just finished chopping up. We're looking for about 1-inch pieces. And then we're going to set these aside and dive into our chicken. Yeah, cool. So today I'm using chicken thigh. I believe in the original Panda Express version they use chicken breast. I think it's actually in their name. But I actually think that chicken thigh is going to be way better. And very rarely will you hear me say that chicken thigh is going to be way better than chicken breast. Because ultimately they're going to basically taste the same. But I actually think this is going to make a pretty big difference because our chicken thigh has a lot of fat on it. So you can see all this white stuff right here and here and here. This stuff, that's all fat. That's really important when we're doing stir fries because that fat is going to render off into our sauce, and it's going to be a big part of how we create nice, like thick and cohesive sauces. Is from that fat. Without that fat, you kind of get this a little bit less tender, a little bit more chewy to your chicken, and it doesn't quite render quite as much fat in the sauce, and then you lose on quite a bit there. So very infrequently will you actually hear me say that I prefer chicken thigh over chicken breast. Most often when we compare the two, I usually just say use whatever you happen to have on hand. I generally keep more chicken thigh on hand than I do chicken breast, but that's purely for the fact that it's cheaper. You can buy chicken thigh for a little bit less per pound than you can get chicken breast. But in this particular case, I actually think it's going to make a pretty big difference. So what I'm doing, so I'm starting off by chopping these into about 1/2-inch pieces. And then what we're going to do is a quick marinade, and then we're going to sear these. So we're going to do 2 sear elements to our stir fry today. The first sear will be this chicken. Oh, the first sear is the chicken? No, the first sear is... Are we deglazing? No, yeah, the first sear is going to be the chicken, and then the second sear is going to be the string beans. We're not deglazing today. I forgot. But before we dive into that, we're going to get into our marinade very first. So I'm going to set this aside into a large mixing bowl-ish, large-ish. Clean all this chicken fat off. All right. Let's see. Let's dive into our marinade next. Okay, so kicking things off, I'm going to start off with, this is going to be 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. This is one of my favorite things to start off a marinade with, almost always. Next up is going to be a single tablespoon of sesame oil. Followed by, this is going to be a tablespoon of hoisin sauce. A single tablespoon of Shaoxing wine. Shaoxing wine, if you're not familiar with it, it's a Chinese cooking wine. It is generally, if you find it here in the States, pretty cheaply manufactured. So if you can't find it, or even if you can find it, regular old dry cooking sherry, especially if you find a nice dry cooking sherry, it might be better than Shaoxing wine. Because Shaoxing wine, because it's so mass produced very, very cheaply here in the States, it's got so much additives to it that just generally going to be losing out on quite a bit of quality there. Last up, that's half a teaspoon of white pepper and half a teaspoon of cornstarch. So by far, I think, in my opinion, maybe the most important part of this marinade is that 1 tablespoon of hoisin sauce. So I love using hoisin sauce in marinades, especially in marinades where I plan on searing stuff. Because I find including a little bit of extra sugar in that hoisin sauce, it helps kick that sear along. Because part of what's searing is that sugar. So it also adds a little bit of flavor, but more importantly, I like what it's doing in that sear. So it's going to help us in that respect. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this marinate. It should be going for 30 minutes. It is not going to go for 30 minutes. It will probably go for closer to 15 minutes. Less. Yeah. The rice wine. No. That rice wine would be a little bit different because, for the obvious reason, rice wine is derived from rice. Shaoxing wine is derived from... What is Shaoxing wine derived from? That is a good question. I actually don't know what Shaoxing wine is derived from. What is dry cooking sherry derived from? Probably from some kind of grape? I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that one. But no, it is not rice wine. It's going to be a little bit different from rice wine. Rice wine is a little bit sweeter. All right, next up, this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. We're getting to work on our sauce base here. So I'm starting off, that's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar. Followed by, this is going to be 2 tablespoons, is that right? Yeah, 2 tablespoons of dark soy sauce. Pretty much soy sauce, but it is a very, very concentrated sauce element. So anytime that we use it, you want to go pretty easy on that stuff because it can get overpowering really, really quickly. So today we're using 2 tablespoons, but I would very, very rarely will you see me using any more than that. When we go to add our sauce, we'll probably do it very, very sparsely to make sure that we don't over season. get carried away pretty quickly. Next up is going to be all of our heat elements today. So this is 1 tablespoon of doubanjiang, which I just added. Doubanjiang is a Chinese fermented chili paste. And then last up is a single tablespoon of laogenma, like colloquially referred to as spicy chili crisp. And I want to add this. Yeah. And so the actual last thing that we're adding today, tablespoon of black bean sauce. So when this camera turns back on. Black bean sauce, generally, if you find it in Chinese, it might just be referred to as bean sauce or something. What it is it's a fermented black bean that's very, very pungent and very, very concentrated, just like that dark soy sauce. So we have added quite a number of things that are extremely concentrated, so you want to keep all of that in mind when you go to add this sauce, because you don't want to just go dumping this into your stir fry. You want to definitely taste and adjust, so that if you find that you're not adding all of this sauce, if you find that you don't use all of it, that's totally fine. Don't trip up about that. That's not the end of the world. And you can absolutely over season if you're not careful with this stuff. So remember how concentrated that this stuff is. Yeah. All right. Go. So over on the stove, I've got my wok heating up, and then we're going to get cooking in a second. Yeah, so what we're going to be doing today, so we are cooking 2 separate elements. So we're going to be doing string beans, and then we're going to be doing chicken. And both of those elements are going to be seared in our wok. So we're actually going to be searing 2 separate things today. We're going to start by searing our chicken, and then what we're going to do is a very, very quick steam in the wok after we finish searing those string beans, and that's going to get us a little bit more tender of a quality to our string beans. So that steam, technically it's optional. If you like crispy string beans, then you can absolutely leave it off. I personally find that string beans are really, really tough to chew on if they're not cooked all the way through, so I like to make sure that they're steamed. But we're going to be adding that to our sear, or following our string bean sear, once we wrap up with the chicken. Yeah. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes over on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday was for the string bean chicken that we're cooking through right now. This Friday coming up is going to be a recipe for a Thai lettuce wrap dish called larb, which is essentially like a minced meat stir fry that's wrapped in a butter lettuce. And then it's like a really, really common Thai appetizer dish that's coming up this day. Lots of stuff like that popping up over on the YouTube channel. So if you haven't yet, definitely make your way over to the YouTube channel and check out what's going on. We got new recipes coming out every Friday. That's also where our second live stream lives too. So if you're looking for the schedule of everything that's coming out and everything that we're going to be cooking on stream, that already lives over there. Lots of fun stuff coming up. We're also up to 4,500 subs by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Cool. Lastly, if you're not sure if your wok is hot enough, generally when you see it start steaming and smoking like that, that's generally a sign of enough heat. So first up, we're going to do our chicken sear. So I'm adding, that's going to be about 4 tablespoons of peanut oil. And then we're going to do our long liao here. And then I'm going to start off with my chicken. We're going to add this a piece at a time. And we're adding this 1 piece at a time, mainly because we're trying to make sure that we don't add too much moisture to our sear. So if we just went and dumped everything into the wok at this point, what you would end up with is a lot of the liquid from our marinade would end up in that wok too. And that's going to make it a little bit harder for us to sear things. So what I like to do is just add the chicken 1 piece at a time. That is obviously a little bit more labor intensive, but if you really want, you could also strain off the marinade and then dump it in, but that might be kind of annoying. The other thing that I like to pay attention to is the direction that we're laying the chicken down on. If we just drop everything in, it might be a little bit more difficult to pay attention to the amount of surface area that's making contact with the wok. So I'm making sure that everything is lying flat side down and that we're having nice, good, solid contact with that wok surface so that we can get some nice crispy pieces of chicken here. There we go. Cool. And then next we're going to do is let that sear. That will take a full 2.5 minutes. So we're going to let it sit 2.5 minutes. And occasionally what I like to do, especially if you're using a round bottom wok like I am, is I like to give that wok a good rotation so that that oil kind of gets to all of the chicken. If you don't rotate it, the parts of the chicken that are positioned a little bit higher up on the wok tend to dry out a little bit, and we don't get quite as much contact with that hot oil if you don't rotate that wok. So I like to give it a little bit of a rotation to make sure everything gets nice and coated in that oil. The very, very important element to searing stuff is about making sure that there is sufficient amounts of oil going on in the wok. Otherwise, you won't get a sear. You will just end up with burnt chicken, which is not what we're after. You're getting moist, yeah. Me too. Cool, we're at 1 minute and 4 seconds. We're gonna let that go for about another minute and change. And that's gonna get us a nice crispy piece of chicken. By far the most important part to searing anything, this is not just true for chicken, but literally anything that you will ever sear, is you gotta stop touching it. The more that you touch something while it's searing, the more trouble that you're going to have to develop that Maillard reaction. And get that nice browning and crispiness. So as you stop and touch stuff, if you like take a peek at it, if you start like shifting it around, if you start moving things too much, that's going to start causing problems with that sear. So by far the most important thing that we need to do anytime that we're searing something is stop moving it. Just leave it be. Except when you're trying to rotate for that oil. Yeah. Because of the food. Thank you for clarifying. Alright. We got maybe another 10 seconds. We're at 2 minutes and 10 seconds. I usually like to give it an extra, like 10 seconds. Yeah. Alright, so I just gave the chicken a little bit of a toss. If you're really dedicated, you could go in and flip each piece of chicken over one by one. I have not really gotten into taking the time to do that. I also haven't found that it makes that much of a difference. Usually what I like to do is just give it a little bit of a toss. If you're really dedicated, tilt that wok forward a little bit and you can try and set some of that oil on fire and you can get a little bit of smokiness in that wok hay, which is what I just did. But otherwise, really, all we're after right now is just making sure that that chicken cooks all the way through, which should only take about another minute or so, and then we'll be ready to go. So I dropped some chicken. I dropped more than a little bit of chicken. Don't do that. Yeah. Looks good. Yeah, thank you. Sweet dog. Also a good username. I like reading the usernames on Reddit. Lots of creative usernames. Alright. Looking good. We got some nice searing going on here. Alright, so I'm pulling my chicken out, and then very important when you sear, is that you've got to rinse that wok out, especially if you're searing something that has a bunch of sugar in it, like we just did. A lot of what we just seared was a bunch of sugar from that hoisin sauce. So that hoisin sauce, as it starts searing, it's going to start essentially caramelizing, and that's going to stick to the bottom of the wok, which is not going to be fun. If you move on to the next thing that you're going to sear, which is going to be our string beans, and that stuff is still at the bottom, what's going to happen is that's just going to start burning, and then you're going to have burnt stuff at the bottom of your wok, which is not fun, and also not what we're after. So very, very important when you're batch cooking in a wok like this is to clean that wok out in between. You don't necessarily have to give it a good scrubbing. I did mostly what I just did was give it a little bit of a rinse, and most of that stuff came out. But what we really want to make sure to do is that there's no like large chunks or any like kind of like crystallized junk sitting at the bottom of the wok. You can see some of it sitting on my spatula right now. That's the stuff that we're looking to make sure doesn't end up in our wok. Do I try and drop the bigger pieces of chicken first? Not really. I guess you could if you're really dedicated. I have never actually taken the time to do that. I could see the justification to doing that. But hypothetically, there shouldn't be a larger piece of chicken. If you did your chopping correctly, they should all be technically relatively the same size. Although I could see the justification for doing that because it would essentially make sure that if you put the larger pieces in first, those are going to take longer to cook. But because hopefully, I think, we did our chopping correctly, everything should be relatively the same size, which is also another very important point to point out, is that when you chop that chicken, it should be relatively equal in size. Otherwise, things are going to cook unevenly, which is a problem in a sear like we just did, because some things might not cook all the way, especially if you plan on just tossing it like we just did. Everything needs evenly, otherwise you're going to have pieces of chicken that's either raw or you're going to have other pieces of chicken that are overcooked and like not like chewy, which is not good. So really important point when you that chicken, everything should be relatively the same size, hopefully, if you did it right. Which is not to say I have definitely fucked that up before and had pieces of chicken that undercooked, which is not fun. All right, next up we're doing the exact same thing, so I'm adding that's another 4 tablespoons of peanut oil, then we're giving our longya, and then we're going to do the same thing with our string beans, which if you're really dedicated, you could do the same thing and put those pieces one at a time. I have never actually done that with string beans because I don't see the point. But what I'm going to do here is I'm making sure, or I'm spreading these string beans out as much as I possibly can. Because any piece of string bean that's not touching the wok right now, it's not going to sear either. So we want to make sure as best as we can that we get every piece of string bean that's available to touch the bottom of the wok so that we can get as much sear as possible. Now if you chopped too many string beans like I did, which I think we did, you might not be able to do that. I got kind of distracted. I think I was talking to someone while I was chopping. But do your best to make sure that we don't have pieces of string bean that are kind of floating on top of each other, because those string beans are not going to get any searing. And then we're going to have less and less crispy string beans going on. There we go. So just like we did with our chicken, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to let that sit for a full 2 minutes, and that's going to develop us a nice crispy and seared piece of string bean. Then what we're going to do is we're going to follow that up with a little bit of water, about like a quarter cup, maybe a little bit less than that, close to the 1/8 cup. And then we're going to cap that and let it steam for another minute. And that's going to get us a nice tender piece of string bean. Way out, that's not that way off topic. You burn your garlic sometimes. Do you know a good time to put it in the pan? Yeah. So that it totally depends. WC Games is a great question. It totally depends on what are the other things that you're cooking. So very, very often, this is actually maybe one of the times ginger in first. But super, super often, you'll see me adding that garlic and ginger really, really early. It's like the first thing that goes into the wok. And the reason that you can do that, it's not going to burn if you follow it up properly. So I'm like cooking with, say, like if the only other vegetable was bok choy, you might see me put that garlic and ginger in first, and then throw the bok choy in, because bok choy does not take very long. So you could toss it in and then just give it a toss, and that's going to be done cooking in about like 2 minutes. A lot of times, if you're cooking like a very heavy protein, so like we did lapchang fried rice a little bit a while ago, which has sausage, and it takes a little while for that to cook, probably like at least 3 or 4 minutes if it's chopped really large. So if that means that if you put that garlic in and then follow it up with that lapchang, it's going to take a little bit longer for that lapchang to sear, which definitely means that your garlic is going to be in danger of burning. But if you're following it up with something that's not going to take that long to cook, like bok choy, for example, you could totally get away with it. And by far, like what's most important about garlic is that it's got to make contact with the oil in the wok. So what's tricky is that means that if you add your garlic too late, you could be ending up throwing it on top, and then it never actually makes contact with that oil. And then what happens is you have lots of garlic, but it doesn't actually bloom out its aromatic, so you don't get as much fragrant flavor from it. So what I like is if I do add my garlic really late, which I have done on occasion. Which I have done on occasion. What I like to do is just make sure that when I do add that garlic really late, what I'll do is I'll shift everything to one side like this, and then we're actually going to do this in a second. I'm going to shift everything to one side, and when I add that garlic, it's landing right here in this hot oil, or there's no hot oil right now, but make sure it lands in that wok somewhere where it makes contact with the oil, and that's going to give us like a nice fragrant qualities from that aromatic. Otherwise, you don't actually get a lot of flavor from it. All right. Cap. Next up, I'm going to do my steam here, so I'm going to add, this is just a little bit of water, not too much or else it won't cook off. And then I'm going to cover that up and we're going to let it steam for about a minute. Not very long. I don't want to go too long here, otherwise the string beans are going to get mushy. But I like to give it a little bit of time with the steam. Otherwise, I find that the string beans, they tend to not cook all the way through, which is not my favorite thing in the world. I like to do the opposite with broccoli because I don't mind a crunchy piece of broccoli. But for whatever reason, a crunchy piece of string bean always sets me off and I don't like it. So I like to give it a little bit of a steam. What we do want to do is we want to do that steam after following the sear though, because that's going to give us a crisp piece of string bean. Yeah, so it doesn't dry out. Yeah, exactly. That's our game plan. We want to make sure that we get that garlic and ginger in hot oil. Otherwise, you don't really get. I mean, you'll probably still taste a lot, but you'll probably still taste it, especially if it's in like large chunks. But you're not going to get as much out of it, which is not great. Yeah. About another 10 seconds. This is awesome trick with the pot lid. Yeah, thank you. Alright, there's our string beans. I'm giving this a little bit of a toss, and the last thing that I want to do is let some of that moisture from that water cook off a little bit. So if you overdid it, if you add too much water, you're going to have a lot of water to cook off, which is generally not what we're after. That's why I said a little bit of water. I mean like less than a quarter cup, and that'll do it. Because the more water that you add, the more water that you're going to have to start cooking off at this point. And if you have to do too much cooking off of water at this point, you're probably going to end up with mushy string beans, which is not fun. But I think we're doing okay though. Alright, so like I was talking about earlier, what we're going to do is push everything to one side of the wok. And then I'm going to add a little bit more oil here because we're a little low. And then next up, what I'm going to do is I'm adding my ginger and my garlic. And I'm very specifically making sure that that ginger and that garlic are making contact with this oil. So we're going to give it a little bit of a toss here in this oil. And at this point, very important to use your nose when you start smelling ginger and garlic. That's when you're in a good place. Usually for me, that's about 10 seconds. But before we go and toss that to combine, we want to make sure that it's fragrant first, so that we have bloomed out those aromatic qualities. Alright, last up is our onion, which I mentioned earlier is going to be very quick in the wok. We're not going to let it go for too long here. Mostly because our onions, they're super delicate, so we don't want these to go for too long. Otherwise, they're going to start falling apart on us. So I'm going to let those onions go for maybe another minute, and then we'll be pretty much done after that. So I mentioned this earlier too, but onions, we want to keep in mind that onions are mainly made up of water. So if you throw them in too early, like if we had thrown them in with our green beans, they would have just disintegrated and then we would have very, very mushy onions. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to cook these onions very, very briefly at very, very high heat, so that we can have very, very crispy onions that are not raw though. Crispy but not raw. That's our goal. Alright, next up I'm throwing my chicken back in the wok. And then finally we're going to add our sauce base here. You'll notice I'm holding off on the last, that's another like almost a quarter cup of that sauce I'm holding back on, because I don't think that it needs it. I think we're doing okay on the sauce element. Last I'm going to add, this is about a quarter cup of beef stock. If you don't have stock, you can also just use water, and it would probably come out the same. Alright, so the the camera's not on. One more time. So the last thing that I'm going to do here, which you should technically make sure and do, don't do it now. Combined, this is about 2 tablespoons of cornstarch with a little bit of water. And we're making sure that this cornstarch is nice and dissolved, referred to as a cornstarch slurry, and it's going to be how we thicken up our sauce today. So I'm adding some, but not all of this. I feel like we don't need all of this cornstarch slurry, especially because we didn't use all of our sauce. So just like with our sauce element, I'm adding my cornstarch a little bit at a time, and keeping an eye on the consistency here. I like this to be a little bit looser and a little bit more saucy. Alright. What temp? Yeah, anytime that you're cooking in a wok, I say this a lot actually, but anytime that you're cooking in a wok, you want that wok to be as hot as it possibly can get. So especially if you're cooking on a home range, that's probably, it's not gonna get as hot as most like wok burners will get you. The wok burners that we use in the pop-up run at, I think, 200,000 BTUs. My home standard home range, I think it runs at something like 54,000. Actually, I think it's even lower. I think it's like 30,000, something like that. So generally speaking, anytime that you're cooking in a wok, your home range, it's not going to get the wok hot, like to the maximum ability of the wok's heat. That's not the end of the world. But essentially what you're doing is trying to keep the wok as hot as it possibly can get. And then all of that batch cooking that we just did is how we get around the fact that our wok is not hot enough. So lots of people ask me about how to cook on a wok on a home range. And essentially what we're trying to do is that our wok is not going to get as hot as get it on our home range by making sure that we don't ever cook everything in the wok all at the same time, which is batch cooking in a nutshell. So I just gave my wok a clean. By the way, very, very important. Make sure that you clean your wok when you're done. Otherwise, if you try and clean your wok after you finish cooking, it's going to be a real pain in the ass because you're going to have a lot of stuff stuck to the wok at that point. So clean it while it's hot, especially if it's carbon steel like mine, and you're going to save yourself quite a bit of trouble. This is the string beans. The string beans. Oh well. That's alright. You saw on YouTube that wok should be red hot. Oh, yeah. You do overcook things sometimes. Yeah. Generally speaking, I like it to be as hot as possible. The only time that you ever see me turn the fire down on a wok is if I'm not stir frying something. So occasionally I'll like turn it down if I'm like simmering. I'll turn it down if I'm deep frying a lot. Or if we're doing like something that requires a long cook like a curry. Lots of times I'll turn that heat down just to let it simmer and like reach simmer heat. But if I'm stir frying, generally have it all the way up. I have on many occasions overheated a wok, but that has only ever happened to me in the wok burners. And it is very dangerous to overheat a wok because if you overheat a wok in a wok burner, it can set the oil on fire and then you will start an oil fire, which is something that I have done and not fun. Be careful, don't do that. But generally speaking, I don't think I've ever managed to do that on a home burner. Not even after like heated up for like 5 minutes or longer. It still won't ever get that hot because the burner is not going to be burning enough to get it red hot. So to answer your question, yeah, I have definitely on fire. So, but also you don't think you'll achieve that on a home burner unless you have like a kitchen that you're cooking in. I guess not. But yeah, let me know if you to do that. I'm very interested. I have, as far as I know, when I cook on my home burners, it doesn't even get like remotely close to how. On the wok burners themselves, both of those are reaching much lower temperatures than my home burner so does. So. And essentially, by just leaving that burner all the way up, that's what you're achieving, is as close to as possible as to what that wok burner. Yeah. Cool. Thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Weekend Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. With new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came string bean chicken, which we just cooked. That recipe is a part of a larger series that I've been doing where we've been hacking a lot of classics that come from Chinese American foods. So lots of things like General Tso's chicken and honey sesame chicken, kung pao chicken, things like that. And kind of take at like what these American classics will look like if we omit all of their American qualities. So this one's super interesting. It comes from the Express menu, which means that it's tweaked to be marketable. And I think they were trying to do is market it as a healthy alternative to some of their other fried chicken recipes. What I thought, as far as I had tasted it, it's pretty bland and not very tasty at all. So what that recipe we did is we retained all the things that go in it. So it has chicken, it has string beans, and it has onions. That's what's in the Panda Express version. And also technically is what they call a ginger. That's basically all sauces to me. Every saute sauce I've ever done has ginger and soy sauce in it. And then we had a bunch of things that kind of end up in wok cooking. So today we used a little bit of dark soy sauce, a little bit of dopanjang, and a little bit of black bean paste. All three of which are like kind of like giving that sauce a little bit punch in the face, a little bit more flavor, and a lot more umami. So stuff like that coming up over on the YouTube types of things. Definitely find your way over to the YouTube and check out what's going on over there. Lots of fun things living over on that YouTube channel, including for everything that we're cooking. What's on the menu for tomorrow night? Oh. Tomorrow night, so tomorrow and Tuesday night at 6:30 PST, we're going to be streaming our kimchi fried rice. It's the fried rice that's really, really popular in the pop-up food booth that we do, which is also called Weekend Cook. What we're going to do is we're going to cook it. I'm going to cook it the way that we have done it in the pop-up booth, which is the egg worked into the fried rice. The original recipe that we had done is topped with a fried egg. The version that we do in the pop-up booth is cooked with egg. So we're going to do it that way. And it's been one of the more popular dishes that we've done in a while. Yeah. So yeah, all of that coming up tomorrow. We're not streaming. And then coming Friday, we're going to come out with a larb gai, which is a Thai dish. Kind of like a Thai small plate. All of that coming up very, very soon. So definitely. If you haven't yet, find your way over to the YouTube channel and check out what's going on over there. We're working our way up to 4,500 subs by the end of the month, so hop over and give it a subscribe if you want to help us subscriber goal. All right, thanks. See you soon. Bye.
If you think that you don't know, never mind that you still don't love yourself. No, you can find it from somebody else. No, everybody's got to go up. Sometimes funny how we shoot the move. Still, will we fight it, baby? Alright, never mind. loving. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got screws, but more like I took it of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. Want to be, baby, yes I want to be. shell. Case my little baby girl is in need. Am I coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Got another mouth to feed. Leave it with the babysitter, mama call the grave digger. Gone with the fallen leaves. Am I coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might have had your fill, I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, I can feel it still. We can fight a war for peace. Give in to that easy living, goodbye to my hopes and dreams. Stop flipping for my enemies. We could wait until the walls come down. It's time to give a little to the kids in the middle, but oh, until it falls, won't bother me.